Welcome to the AIOps Evolution Weekly broadcast. This series features discourse on topics pertinent to the C-level conversation revolving the integration of artificial intelligence into the ever-evolving IT operations landscape. Discover trends and actionable tips for digital transformation, as well as the latest news on how AIOps is transforming business and government operations to create flow in their organization. And don't stay in the dark on the latest industry news. Join the AIOps Evolution community to stay connected and subscribe to the show at AIOPSevolution.com. Now, let's join our hosts, Sean McDermott and Bill Driscoll, IT thought leaders, visionaries, and the voices on the other end of the mic for the latest episode of AIOps Evolution Weekly.
Welcome, everyone, to the AIOps Weekly broadcast. I'm your host, Sean McDermott, and my co-host, Bill Driscoll. Hey, Bill, how's it going?
Good, Sean. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How's everything up in, I know you're up in Delaware, and the tropical storm came through. How are things going up there? I've been reading.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, there was some hurricane or tornado threats. Didn't happen. I saw New York yesterday was got hit pretty rough. So, I think I got the tropical storm kind of glanced us. We had a few hours of heavy rain, but yeah, it wasn't as bad as New York City and some other areas further north. I think it got pummeled. I think it was 3 inches in Central Park in 1 hour. So
yeah, I read that, and flooding in the subways and things like that. It's crazy. I'm down in Florida, as you know.
Yep. Yeah.
And we got lucky. I think the hurricane went to the west and hit Louisiana, and then cut over to the east above us. And I mean, we have rain every day here. So
yeah, you don't often get to say in Florida you got lucky.
Yeah,
I think everything gets it.
That is true. All right. So happy Friday. You want to talk a little bit AIOps before we go into the weekend?
That sounds good to me.
Awesome. So I'm gonna call an auditable today, because normally we do 2 stories and kind of a general topic that you and I talk about. But today I'd like to talk a couple episodes around DevOps. And so today I'm going to kind of call an audible, and I'm going to switch things around a little bit. I think so. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start off talking about DevOps as kind of as a refresher, and then start talking about, and then then there's a couple articles that have come up. I know I have one that I liked, and I think you say you have one of AIOps related to DevOps. So how's that sound?
That sounds good. We're sort of shifting left, aren't we?
We're going to shift left. We're going to do a little bit of a reverse thing here.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's talk about DevOps and kind of refresh everyone's mind. So what is DevOps? There's actually two things I want to talk about today regarding this. One is what is DevOps in the context of AIOps, but even as a foundation to that is monitoring versus observability. So let's start off with DevOps. So what exactly is DevOps, right? DevOps to me it's a methodology that's enabled through processes and tools to have kind of a complete loop of application release and operations in one kind of full circle of like I said, this methodology. This to me is very important, because as an ops guy that spent the last 30 years doing operations work, it's not unheard of, and even still today, that new applications and capabilities or systems get rolled into production, and operations takes them over, and they're really kind of unaware about how to manage these things. Either they don't know how to instrument them for monitoring, or they don't know exactly what to do as far as if the systems go down and the application starts seeing problems. So DevOps is really about that problem, and going from kind of a continuous build, test, and release schedule with operations in mind. So the operations team are involved in that and are able to inject needs for monitoring and performance tracking and things like that and then that information feeds back into the dev team for their next release. So there's all kinds of what it really requires is a methodology of how to do this, and there's lots of methodologies out there that you can follow and best practices. But it also requires organizational change, organizational cooperation, kind of breaking down the silos, and then technologies such as continuous release applications and automated testing, as well as new ways of doing monitoring. So that's how I see DevOps. How do you see things?
Yeah, my point of view, which I don't claim to have invented it, just what I observed and listened to other people and seen in different organizations.
You didn't invent DevOps?
I didn't invent it, no, the term either. Although I'm trying to invent words to put, acronyms to put in front of ops. I think DevOps was written to some extent to make the ops people not feel so lonely and isolated. So we keep putting words in front of them to say we're with you, ops. But I think DevOps really started as a problem statement. We have a problem, which is we're releasing software that's breaking in ops, and they don't know the context, they don't know the relationships, they don't know how it was built, and it becomes fire after fire. And Gene Kim, I think we both know, wrote a book, Phoenix Project. I don't know what year it was, 8 to 10 years ago, it feels like, and that sort of popularized, I guess, among us geeks that. This is a real problem. And that was probably at the tipping. I don't think he caused the tipping point, but that was kind of the tipping point, I think, of when organizations realized this has to change. And so I think that was really the problem statement. And I think the problem really was we've got to make life better for ops, and we've got to do better quality. But DevOps very quickly sort of responded to the business versus ops in some ways to go faster. So it's really about solving those two problems of how do we be more reliable and better quality and prevent more operations problems, but then how do we go faster? And I think that there's a loop of that feedback loop of trying to bring experiences and operations and test frameworks back into the development cycle. But I think as things go faster, it's making the problem harder and harder and more complex to solve because the applications are getting much more complex. And so, I think the problem statement is still there. And I think a lot of organizations have put tools and frameworks in place, but it's still very much evolving in the industry. And kind of depending on the company, if you're a software SaaS product or you're an enterprise product, there's just very variable, I guess, levels of adoption or implementation.
Yeah, that kind of brings up a good point, right? And there's levels of adoption. So just kind of to go through this again, what is the benefit of a DevOps? A shift to DevOps, and there's all kind of primary ones, right? There's speed and agility of delivery of services. There's reliability now that you've got the operations team really integrated in with the app dev team, and the app dev team is thinking about operation aspects as they're building out these applications and doing their testing. You got a higher reliability capability. You can scale faster, improved collaboration. You're breaking down teams and things like that and getting teams working together. And if you bring security into it and you start having this idea of DevSecOps, right? And I even heard the term DevBizSecOps. So yeah. I think we're getting a little crazy with putting, words together. But DevSecOps makes even more sense because, one of my other passions is cybersecurity, and you've got to really build cybersecurity into the application itself, and make sure that you understand how these things are going to be monitored and managed from a security aspect. So again, doing all this is part of your application teams understanding security aspects and operational aspects. And making sure that your security and your operations teams understand the application architectures and things like that kind of makes everything more smooth. You bring up a good point, right, about adoption. And I came across a study that actually, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I'll read it to you. A survey of 600 IT professionals conducted by Mabi, provider test automation platform. The biggest barriers to adopting DevOps practices are more closely related to organizational issues at 82% than the technology. Only 11% of respondents in their organizations have fully implemented DevOps practices. On the plus side, nearly a quarter say they're well on their way to achieving that goal. So here we are, like 7, 8, 9, 10 years later, right? And you're still seeing not wide adoption of DevOps, even though pretty much everyone thinks it's the kind of de facto standard for how to run a application delivery organization.
Yep. Yeah, you sent this article over to me, and I read it, and it's interesting that the author does write about this study and how little the adoption has come about, and then most of the rest of the article is talking not so much about how to change your organization or how to make your organization better. It's really about how AIOps is going to come to the rescue, which is a technology, primarily a technology or a suite of technologies. So it's solving organizational issues with technology. And I scratched my head and said that's kind of paradoxical, but paradoxes are true, right? In a lot of cases. And so I actually do think that it is, I think there's one software company, or somebody at the company who said once, like, well, we're just not finding users that are smart enough to use our product. And that's sort of the mindset, I think, of a lot of technology providers, that you don't have.
Is that their marketing tagline?
Yeah, right. No, it's their internal frustration of engineering. But I think that, it is incumbent upon software makers to make the products easy to be adopted. And so I think a lot of organizations resist change because the technology just isn't there yet to make it easy to adopt, to make it easier for the processes to adjust. There's just technical barriers. And I think today, for a long time, I think just a big barrier was the volume of information that you have to deal with, the volume of noise, the finding needles in a haystack. And a lot of organizations just throw their hands up. Whereas I think with AIOps and the promise of that and what he's advocating, that's what's going to solve it, is let these machines sort of feed it a lot of data and let their algorithms kind of point to you to where the problem is and where you need to resolve things and troubleshoot. And that might be a barrier that we can remove, to better organizational adoption. But there's still work to be done, obviously, in the organization and the process and the people side. But I don't totally disagree with him that technology is an important part of organizational change.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. But I think you brought up a good point, and that is, this article led off with the organization issues, right? And then shifted to technology, and I think we do need to generally talk more about organizational issues. And I know that our company does a lot of work around organizational change management, and most IT projects actually fail. I mean, studies show that most IT projects really ultimately fail because of lack of adoption and lack of organizational change, right? So, but that we're not here to talk about that. We'll do a whole other episode on that. So, but I think one last point on DevOps and the adoption, I think, is you and I have talked about this in the past. People are we as engineers tend to try to solve problems by looking, and technology is fun and technology is sexy, and I think what's happening out there a lot, and I think you would agree, is that traditional organizations really haven't changed, and they're trying to inject new modern technologies into that, like Ansible and things like that. So these teams are actually deploying some of this technology, but not necessarily changing the underlying environment and organization and breaking down the silos. So that's why they're kind of struggling, is that they're not all in on DevOps. They're kind of half in by making investments in technology, but not necessarily going the full doing deep work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yep. So the one thing you did bring up monitoring and observability earlier, and that this article talks about observability and some of the adoption of observability as a key point. But I think you were alluded to earlier, there's really a difference between observability and what we traditionally call monitoring.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. I mean, I think that when I first heard the term observability, and I mean that not too long ago, I immediately in my head was like, oh, this is just another marketing term for monitoring, right?
Yeah.
But it's really not. If you look at it, you look at the definition and how people are trying to position this concept of observability. And I think this is an important thing to kind of bring up as the basis for AIOps. And the foundation is monitoring is the ability to bring in lots of data to understand the state of things, right? So through log data or polling or APIs and pulling information, it's the collection of all this data so you can understand kind of the state of the environment, right? Whereas observability is being positioned as the ability to understand context of all that information to resolve issues and understand the impact of that data to services and applications. So it's really observability is the layer on top of monitoring, and you're seeing AI being injected into observability, and that makes total sense, right? Because you're looking at monitoring, collecting, a mass amounts of data, and you're going to need something like machine learning and AI to start aggregating that data, looking at pattern matchings and trending, looking at context of other data sources to really understand the root of causes and correlation of events so that you can get to kind of the clearest answer of what exactly is going on. So I just wanted to bring it up to kind of distill the definition of what monitoring and observability is, because I do hear a fair amount of confusion about that in our client base.
Yep. Yeah, I think I was thinking upstream, downstream. A lot of times when we talk about systems, what's upstream or downstream from the other, and I always have to think, it always seems backwards to me. But I think in a continuous feedback loop where you've got observability and monitoring kind of interacting together or playing together as really two distinct but interrelated things, they're both upstream and downstream from each other, and that observability is generating that original context, generating kind of all the source information, feeding that into your monitoring systems, but then your monitoring systems sort of playing back into observability and using it to improve the way you do observability. But that brings up some of the people side, right? In that, we say, I think people buy from people, right? When in the sales world, and think in technology world, it's people build technology for people, and technology creates problems for people. It also helps people. And I think the next article we brought up was written from that perspective, and it's actually a blog, Alpha List, and they talk about or brought on some of the thoughts of one of the founders of Pagerduty. Pagerduty was created, I didn't know this, by some folks out of Amazon. I think Alex Solomon was one of the founder who was the one talking about this. Really where, Amazon was one of the forerunners in DevOps, and they saw that we were getting paged whenever there were problems, and the whole team was getting paged, and they wanted to solve the problem of, we need to make sure just the team or the people who own the code, they're the ones who have to solve that particular code or that particular component. And so PagerDuty provided logic to really distribute and route to the right teams, the right people, based on information in the code, and really manage the pagers better. And so, he's that product, as well as a lot of other products, are sort of bringing in AIOps, bringing in machine learning, because the volume of observability data that's being passed through maybe a separate monitoring system, in some cases directly to alerting system like PagerDuty or others that are out there. You got to sort through this. You can't continue to just, you can route the information to the right team, but there's a lot of noise in that information. You got to do the right filtering. You can't, if you page once, you don't want to keep paging. Problem still there, here's more information. You want to distill that and cluster it together. And so I think that, that overall problem of it, this PagerDuty was created and notification systems were created for the kind of leading edge of DevOps teams, was really kind of the start of applying some machine learning and AIOps back into the development environment, and kind of the people the developers really responsible for operating the platform. So I thought it was interesting. There's a few other key points in there, but maybe I'll ask you if you had a chance to look at that article and had any thoughts.
Yeah, I did have a chance to look at the article, and I think what I found interesting about the product or about that article is, we talk a lot about AIOps, and we're actually launching our season 2 of the AIOps Evolution podcast. We're in production right now on that, and we're talking to a lot of different AIOps platform vendors, and so that will be out in October. So shameless plug there for our podcast season 2. But the point I'm making is that we're talking to a lot of vendors this season, and they're all really around the kind of the primary use cases of monitoring, observability, looking at mass event streams, correlation, root cause analysis. That's the core of what they're doing. And we've made the case, and certainly you and I have had a lot of conversations, that AIOps really is a strategy, not a platform. Mm-hmm. And I think PagerDuty is a really good example. And the other article that I brought up talked about application performance management, right? And those systems. PagerDuty is a really good example of a use case that's not monitoring and observability. It's about aggregating alert data and contextual things using AI and machine learning to be better and more efficient at alerting. Mm-hmm. And I think that what's going to be very interesting to watch is whether vendors like Gartner and Forrester, and Gartner came up with the term AIOps, and Forrester just released their Wave document on AIOps platforms. And they're looking at that. They're associating that use case of monitoring observability to AIOps, whereas this is a really good example where we're going to start seeing AI and machine learning kind of proliferating all through the operations environment. So one might actually ask, is PagerDuty really legit in saying, hey, we're deploying AIOps? In my case would be absolutely, because they're using AI, they're using machine learning, they're in the operations environment, therefore they fall under the guise of AIOps. So, and application performance management is the same thing, right? You're talking about, that's still like monitoring, but it's lower level monitoring of application, even code base, looking into different libraries and things like that, to give a very granular view to the application teams on what the applications are doing and how the code is working. That would feed into a observability platform, but you're starting to see application performance management platforms embedding AI machine learning into their platform. So there's AI machine learning going on at the code level before it even gets into some kind of observability platform. Yep. So like I said, I think this is going to be interesting to see where Gartner and Forrester start expanding this view of AIOps into all these different things, because we're going to start seeing it everywhere, right? We're going to see it we're already seeing it in ServiceNow deploying some of their machine learning and virtual chat bots and things like that. I
think that, you're sort of alluding to this, that where does AIOps fit? And I think Gartner originally viewed it as this event aggregator product category, but really we've talked about a lot of use cases in the network worlds, the Ciscos and Junipers and their competitors, and the storage and the cloud world. AIOps is really, or AI and machine learning, is being embedded, it's being deployed, it's being made available across the entire pipeline, right? From the makers of the technology, the developers of the software, in observability, in the aggregation of monitoring systems, the alerting systems, all the way to incident management, and all the way to interfacing with customers about problems they're having. And so I was thinking earlier about, products. Products were very disparate, right? You had a newspaper and you had your camera and you had your, maybe news feed, and you had all kinds of other things that you did. You had your clock, your stopwatch, and now it's all in one platform. It's all in your phone, right? And I think the technology in the phone, the user interface, the touch screen, the resolution, that platform of a lot of technologies sort of allowed all these other products to kind of come together. And, this is a little off the cuff, but AI ops in some way, the AI and machine learning, is it the platform, right? Or is it the strategy that sort of melds all these different product categories together, and kind of we'll see in a dozen years or 3 years, that it's all one product set. It isn't distinct products. It's one product that kind of handles the whole thing end to end, but AI ops is really the glue that made that happen. So it'll be interesting to see where this industry goes, but we're certainly seeing AI ops being talked about among a lot of different traditional, categories in the space of IT operations.
Yeah, I mean, where I stand on this, right? I mean, I think AI ops is really the overarching umbrella of all this, and you're going to have many products with many different use cases, all under the operations umbrella, deploying AI and machine learning. So therefore, the entire operations environment now is an AI ops strategy. So,
right,
and we'll talk more about that in every episode in the future.
Yeah.
But I think, you bring up I'll kind of leave on this one last point, and kind of jumping off of what you said. You talk about the phone, right? The iPhone. And, if you were to basically go out there and say, because I've done this, right? I said, what are the best cameras out there? And you go and you get a search, and it's like Canons and Nikons and SLR cameras and mirrorless cameras. And you don't see the iPhone in there yet. I know that there's one photo site that I read one time, something like 85% of the photos that are uploaded to this photo site are all generated off the iPhone. So if you don't include the iPhone in your camera comparisons, then you're kind of missing a big part of the market. But is the iPhone a camera? Well, yeah. Is it a phone? Yeah. Is it a digital assistant? Yeah. Is it a music player? Yeah. Is it a content, streaming device? Yeah. So it's all this is going to start getting blurred, and I think this is one thing that is confusing to the market, right? And this is hopefully what one of the things that we're able to do at this show is bring some clarity to what's going on out there. And I think, I've seen it firsthand. Before the pandemic, I went to a conference, and there were probably 50, 60 vendors in this conference center, and 40 of them were saying AI ops. Right. And so there's going to be a lot of terminology, people being used and just saying, hey, we're AI ops. And there's going to lead to a lot of confusion. So we'll leave it at that. Next week, we're going to talk more about DevOps, but we're going to spend really kind of talking about jumping off of this thing about what is AI ops, right? We're going to explore the idea of DevOps and AI and machine learning in the build, test, and release aspects of DevOps. So I'm excited I know that's something you wanted to talk about, and I'm excited to talk about that too.
Yeah, we'll look forward to it.
I'm excited to talk about DevOps and AI ops. Is that kind of crazy?
Yeah, just don't tell anyone unless you're listening.
Yeah, as we broadcast out to like 1 million people, don't tell anybody. So, good. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in this week. My name is Sean McDermott and Bill Driscoll. I want to thank our sponsor, Windward Consulting Group. Windward is a global leader in AI ops, and you can find them at www.windward.com. And Bill, have a nice week, and I will catch up with you next week. Stay dry.
Yep, I sure will. All right. Have a good one, John.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation about AI ops and the future of IT operations. Interested in a deeper dive on these topics? Check out our resources available at AIOpsevolution.com. And remember to subscribe to get the latest episode.